Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and today we're going to talk about adventure racing. According to their website, the Adventure Racing World Championship takes teams on a journey in exotic locations through over 700 kilometers of trekking, running, mountain biking, kayaking, rope work, and navigation. Teams of 4 are expected to compete in the course over 4 to 8 days. Last week, the movie Arthur the King, starring Mark Wahlberg, was released in theaters, and it highlights the sport. Our guest today is not an actor. She's a real-life adventure racer, and she's here to give us the inside scoop. Sarah Goldman from Asheville, North Carolina, is with us, and she is the Community Programs Director for the North Carolina Outward Bound School. Sarah developed her adventure spirit early on in life through Outward Bound as a family rite of passage. She's proudly served as a firefighter, a police officer, and as both an adventure racing participant and coach. She knows all about how to do hard things, and I am so excited to share her story. Sarah, welcome to the campfire.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Man, I'm so excited to have this conversation. I took my daughters to see the movie Arthur the King on Saturday, and I knew that sport, I guess I had a vague idea that it existed, but it was really fun to see it live on camera. Being a real life adventure racer, I want to go straight there. I know you saw it too. What did you think?
Well, I'm a real life adventure racer. I'm also a real life dog owner and dog lover. So it's like combining my two favorite things.
Yeah.
So it would be hard for me to say anything but positive things about that because it's like two of my most favorite things. But in the end, the movie is a movie. It's Hollywood. I thought it was entertaining. I thought it gave a really pretty good overview of what the sport looks like. I mean, there were certainly some things that were wildly far-fetched and would never happen in real life. If they did, I'd be afraid for whoever was doing them. So maybe took some things to be a little bit extreme. But yeah, I enjoyed it. It was a fun ride.
All right. I don't want to do any spoilers because people need to go see the movie, but I definitely need to get your thoughts on the zip line scene.
Yeah. So it's funny. I saw this with a group of friends, a group of teammates actually. And one of my teammates was texting me during the movie and said, "Oh my gosh, we're never doing that." Meaning it was, and why would you ever do that? I mean, I don't want to give away too much, but it was one of those things where I looked at it, I'm like, there's so many reasons why that didn't have to happen that way and could have been way, played out in a way different way. But it was, I mean, honestly, it's ridiculous.
Like we said,
like totally honest, it's ridiculous and very unsafe, and we would never do that ever.
It is Hollywood.
Without question. I mean, I felt for her. I was like, okay, go for it. I wouldn't do that, but
yeah. Definitely got my adrenaline going sitting in the movie theater chair with my feet up in the recliner seat. Exactly. But yeah, it was a great movie. Highly recommend people check it out. But I guess with that, for people that aren't familiar with adventure racing, I gave a very brief description of it in the intro, but can you tell us a little bit more about what adventure racing is?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you pretty much nailed it with the description that the ARWC uses. Adventure racing is a multidisciplinary sport. It's a team adventure sport, meaning that you participate typically in groups of 4 that are co-ed. But at this point in racing, it can be kind of any configuration, like a 3-person all-female. We even have a lot of soloists that are racing now. But the true spirit of the sport was the 3-4-person co-ed teams. And when we say teams, it's not a relay. It doesn't mean that one person does one part and another person picks up and goes from there. You have to be with your teammates the entire time throughout the race, which honestly, Arthur the King does a great job of demonstrating how close you have to be during that time and those relationships that form as a result. But it often takes about 3 to 4 disciplines, which normally is some sort of like foot travel, so running or trekking, depending on the length of the race, mountain biking, which could be like gravel, pavement, or single track mountain biking. Paddling, which could look like a lot of different things. It could look like a sea kayak. It could look like whitewater canoeing. It could look like flatwater canoeing. It could look like pack rafting. And finally, the fourth element, which is really the hallmark of adventure racing, is that navigation, utilizing map and compass to go from point to point along sort of a general predetermined route, but you pick your way as you go, which is all part of the fun and strategy.
Yeah, that was really cool, like in the movie, and I'd love the real life piece of hearing about that, because it seems like there's like I mean, in the movie there were transition points, right? Like almost in like a triathlon, there's like checkpoints you have to go through, but you can get there any way you want.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's typically, I mean, that's exactly it, is you're transitioning between elements. So that's why you have to go to that spot. But what makes adventure racing unique is that it's not a prescribed race course. You don't get handed a map and it says, this is the way you go. You get handed a map with a number of different checkpoints on it, and you choose your route between those checkpoints, which means you've got to make up decisions of, do I want to go this way first? Do I want to go that way first? Is this point going to be worth us collecting or not? And with adventure racing, the team that finishes in the shortest amount of time with the most amount of points is who wins. And not every course is designed that every point can be collected, so you've got to make some sort of strategy choices in that.
So say that again. You said not every point can be collected.
Yeah, so it's a phrase we use called clearing the course, meaning when a race designer creates a course, they may have in their mind that, oh, this course is going to be clearable, meaning that in the prescribed amount of time for the race, it's reasonable to expect that teams would be able to get all of the points. Some races are created where there's so many points intentionally, they go, yeah, there's no way this is clearable, which means you're going to have to make a lot of choices. So when you see teams out in the woods, you're like, I don't know, how many points do they have so far? How many, is that more or less than us? And is it worth us trying to go get that one out there when we might be able to get that one easily off a trail? Or these two might be closer together, but they're off a trail, so the navigation is harder. So it's really just sort of making those choices. And sometimes you don't know what the race designer's intent was.
So, but am I understanding correctly that like each team has to hit every single checkpoint?
No, it depends on the style of race. So oftentimes you'll be given, and this is when people start to get kind of overwhelmed with adventure racing, because there's so many different ways it could evolve. But I would say most race courses do not require you to get every single point. You'll have what's called a mandatory checkpoint, meaning let's say a race director really wants you to go climb that mountain. Well, they're going to put a mandatory checkpoint at the top of that mountain. If you don't get there, you cannot continue, right? Or you're like disqualified or going to continue unofficial if you don't get it. So it's pretty rare to have them have to have all points be mandatory, especially in races where folks are really still learning the sport, because if you can't find one, then you're stuck and you can't really move on. So it's just different types of racing. Sometimes within a particular section, they'll say you have to get all the points. But it, again, really just sort of depends.
I just had a thought, like as you were talking, that you said sometimes the race director wants you to climb this particular mountain. The immediate thought that went through my head was like the Hunger Games. Like, like how much parallel is it to the Hunger Games?
Well, I would say we're not, competing against each other to the death. But I would say that, what's cool about when I say, race director wants you to, climb that mountain. What's exciting about adventure racing is it takes you to beautiful and amazing places. And the race directors like curate the best spots in this area for you to go visit. And by saying, I'm going to put a mandatory point up there, they're saying you really should go see this and I don't want you to miss it. Hopefully you'll be there in the daytime and not nighttime, but it's hard to say.
That's awesome. So you just mentioned some of the locations. What are some of the locations that you've raced in?
Yeah, so I've been pretty fortunate. I was able to race. I've raced in 2 adventure racing world championships, which is the race that's featured in Arthur the King. So I did one in Australia, New South Wales, so southeast side of the country. And then I did another ARWC race, the world championship in Wyoming, which was the first time it had ever been in North America, which was actually a pretty big feat for us because adventure racing is not super popular in the United States the way it is in other countries. And then I've been fortunate to sort of go all over the United States, really had some great racing up in New England. There's quite a bit of racing here in the Southeast as well.
Wow. like I'm thinking Australia and Wyoming. I mean, Wyoming in particular, does wildlife come into play?
Not so much. I mean, you're definitely in very remote areas. And I would say that, the typical, we're in big cattle ranches and that kind of thing. So, actual backcountry wildlife, no more so than anywhere else when you're kind of off the beaten path. But nothing super remarkable.
Gotcha. All right. So
Australia, yes, though. Australia, absolutely wildlife, because everything in Australia can kill you, right? All the snakes are venomous and poisonous, and all of the bugs can bite you, and spiders can hurt you, and everything there is pretty dangerous. So wildlife there is certainly a big piece of it.
So what kind of wildlife encounters did you have in Australia?
It's interesting. I was really excited when I saw my first kangaroo, which was really, I learned after being there for many more days that kangaroos are like squirrel in the United States, right? They are everywhere. But I saw my first kangaroo actually on a paddling section where there was a checkpoint on a beach. And he was just sort of standing there. I was like, hey, like there's a kangaroo. And then of course we saw, thousands more at that point. In fact, they're like almost like raccoons in the sense that we might be sort of asleep on the side of the road and we, like they'll come in and pull food out of your backpack, like right underneath your head. But their jellyfish, that was something that was one of the most amazing things I'd ever seen. We were paddling up into this river and they were basketball sized.
Wow.
And I swear they took up 70% of the water space underneath us. And I just remember sort of, sticking my paddle in so carefully because they were very intimidating and scary and I didn't really want to disturb them. But, spiders there are really dangerous. I had a teammate not a teammate, but a colleague on another team who was bitten by a spider and the team sort of looked at her and was like, well, you're either going to die or you're not because everything there is so dangerous. But
and then they just keep going.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that's wild. Okay. So we're not unclipping from any zip lines, but did you, do you have any kind of situations that you found yourself in any of these races that you want to share?
Yeah, definitely not unclipping from any zip lines. That is true. Also, not just using zip lines that you may find in the woods randomly.
Yeah.
Also, something we probably wouldn't do. It's so interesting because it's all kind of relative, right? In terms of what's considered a kind of harrowing situation. Yeah. I certainly have been involved in some paddling situations that have felt, kind of right on that edge of this may not be the safest thing we've ever done in our life. Just sort of big surf in the dark at, with really cold temperatures and being super fatigued. You get lost a lot adventure racing, and the length of the race really determines how much of it you might spend lost. A shorter race, you'll be lost for a short amount of time. Long race, you might be lost for a long amount of time. So I've definitely had some moments of, wow, I'm not sure we're going to be able to figure ourselves out of this one.
But we're here talking right now. So you did.
You did, for sure.
You made it.
Yep. I've sustained some injuries during races that caused, some situations that felt a little bit dicey, sort of getting out of that and getting sorted. But it's kind of a part of the fun,
Yeah. So how did you get into it? I remember when we were first talking, you made a comment to me that adventure racing is the thing. You said adventure racing is the thing I've always wanted to do. So I'm curious if you could share how this all came to be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I first heard about adventure racing. I feel like I grew up watching adventure racing, the Eco Challenge. Like lots of folks who are currently involved in the sport will say that they watched Eco Challenge as a kid and said they wanted to do that. And as I went back and actually looked at when Eco Challenge came out, I was not a kid. I was probably like 25 when Eco Challenges were out there. But I remember seeing it on the Discovery Channel and being like, I want to do that. I want to do that someday. And then just sort of kind of fell to the back, as a lot of things often do. And then when I had an opportunity to jump into it, I took it. I was just really excited to do so. So it was one of those things that you saw and you're like, man, I've always wanted to do that thing.
So you saw this thing called Eco Challenge at roughly age 25 maybe and said like, I want to do that. But there had to have been something deep inside that even got you excited about turning that show on and watching that. Is there more to the story? Like what led up to that excitement at age 25 when you saw that this was a thing?
Yeah. I mean, I'm fortunate. I was instilled with sort of that explorer spirit really early on in life, and just that sort of quest for adventure and doing hard things. And, I was racing bikes in college, mountain bikes and road bikes. And it was like, wow, this sort of combines all the things that I want to do. Just sort of being out in the elements, out in the wilderness, relying on another group of people. So I think it was just combining a whole lot of parts of me all in one when I saw it.
Yeah. Well, you grew up in a family that really instilled the adventure spirit.
Yeah.
And so much so that you actually have kind of a family rite of passage. And I wonder if you could kind of share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about it. It's pretty much my favorite thing to talk about.
Yes, it is.
Which is, Outward Bound. Which, Outward Bound is a, international organization that uses outdoor education to foster social emotional learning and build character. The mission of Outward Bound is changing lives through challenge and discovery. And for me, I never knew a time in my life when I didn't know about Outward Bound. My mother went to Outward Bound when she was an adult, like in her 30s, in the very, very early 80s. And I was only 2 years old. And she went on this adult wilderness course, actually here in North Carolina, which is crazy because we weren't living here at the time. We were living in the Midwest, but she came down here and went on an Outward Bound course and had a really transformative life experience. Came home, shared that with my dad, and he went out on an Outward Bound course as a result of that. And essentially my parents said to me at one point, and my older brother, said, hey, you don't have to go to college. We're not going to make you go to college. But the one thing we are going to make you do is go on an Outward Bound course. And it's true. It's the only thing they ever really made me do was go on an Outward Bound course. And by the time I was able to go, I was old enough, I was really excited to go and had been really anticipating it and had really sort of been doing a lot of those things already by the time I got there. So it's really important to me to do that since, I watched both my parents go or had heard about my parents' stories. I was too young to actually have watched them, but then saw my brother go on 2 different courses, and it just became, a really family rite of passage.
Yeah. It's such a powerful thing. You don't have to go to college, but you have to go to Outward Bound.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think my parents were pretty, on the ball with that. I have memories, like my earliest memory as a kid was all 4 of us loading up in a full-size Econoline Ford van, where they even got like a G monogrammed on the hood. And I can see the picture of it, like in my mind's eye, 100% of us all in front of the van, perfect, very Griswolds looking.
Love it.
And then spent that entire summer, road tripping across the United States, camping, kind of doing that without any serious plan. And really those are my earliest childhood memories, is doing that. And we didn't do a lot of it. Like, that's the thing, is that we weren't the family that went camping every weekend. That was not us. I mean, we went to Club Meds and took cruises, and that was like this really isolated time, but it shows how impactful, like very, even though it was an isolated experience, it impacted the rest of my life.
Do you have any early memories, like maybe of that trip or another trip, like early that really stuck with you, like a moment in nature or something that just really grabbed you?
Yeah. And, this is like family lore at this point, but, we had this green family tent, the big ones that had like the poles on the big silver aluminum poles on the outside, and you'd set it all up. And every time we'd get to a campsite and set it all up. And so one morning, I don't even know where we were, but we were asleep in the tent. And this is the dead of summer, right? This is during summer vacation. We're asleep in the tent, and we hear something like hitting the tent. This is kind of like early morning. It's like hits the tent, and then like you can hear it just sort of like sliding down and sliding down. And the joke is that my dad was like, I think there's a bear out there spraying gasoline on the tent, right? Like just something absurd, but we had no idea what it was. And my parents opened the tent, and we, step outside, and it's been snowing. And it was just kind of out of nowhere. And it was the sound of snow kind of accumulating on the top of the tent and then sliding down off the side of the tent. And since no one had expected, or even, it was just so out of place to end up getting snow. I'm sure we were probably in California and Sierras or something like that. But that's one of those stories that's just, kind of totally lodged in my mind. I've got another one. Like, I think I remember the first time I ever went to the bathroom in the woods, like the first time I ever peed in the woods. I think I actually remember it at a campground during that trip. So yeah, pretty, that's formative life experience right there.
It's kind of freeing though, isn't it? I mean, it's like breaking down like these mental barriers of what you can and can't do, right?
Absolutely. And I was probably, I think I was 4 or 5 during that trip, maybe 6, 6, 7. I mean, I was pretty young. So a lot of it is the combination of the stories that were told to me about that trip and the pictures I've seen of it and the things that really, I mean, they are my earliest memories.
Yeah. So I want to talk just for a second about your mom. She went on this experience in her 30s, right? You talked about doing this as an adult, and maybe there is like an assumption that outward bound is something that kids do, but obviously it's not. And I just wonder if you could, like, first of all, what happened to mom on that trip that was
Yeah.
so impactful?
Yeah, so and it is definitely Outward Bound is for adults and kids alike. But so my mom was there on an adult course, and one of the big course elements of an Outward Bound experience is your solo, and that
Mhm.
can look different depending on the length of your course and all those sorts of things. But at that time, early '80s, a solo consisted of 4 days, 3 nights in the woods alone. Which is just a time for reflection and a pause and to really think about, kind of take stock of your life. And so the way it's been told to me by my mom numerous times is that while she was on that solo, she decided that she wanted to have her life look a little bit different, and what that was is that she wanted to become a doctor, and she wanted to be able to do that. And she had been teaching in communications and was completely outside that field at the point. And so she came home, and she, over the course of the next couple of years, she did her post-bac, all those things, and then ended up applying to and going to medical school and becoming a physician while I was a teenager, right? So she really made this huge transformative life change as a result of kind of the reflection and the opportunity that she was able to think about and have clarity about her future that came as a result of being on her solo at Outward Bound.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so I want to talk about how that kind of transmitted to you, because now it becomes this family rite of passage. Everybody in the family is going to do it. And let's just put a placeholder there because I want to come back to that and talk about that. But let's stay with the Outward Bound as an adult, because I think one of the reasons why I love the Outward Bound organization so much, it's just so aligned with what, my whole passion is on this podcast, is helping people step outside of their comfort zone and listen to that voice inside that calls to adventure. So, for people that are listening to this podcast and they like this idea of adventure, Outward Bound is such a great place to get started. And I also think it's really unique because it's not an outward bound trip. It's not an outward bound expedition. They're specifically called outward bound courses. So I wonder if you could just talk about that, speaking directly to the adult that thinks I couldn't do that, I'm too old.
Yeah, absolutely. So, first and foremost, Outward Bound is an educational institution, and everything that we do has educational outcomes. It's not about being a guided trip or going out to have just sort of an entertaining, adventurous experience. That is a part of it, but what we really want you to do is have experiences that you can learn from, and we create the conditions and the container for that learning to happen so that you can take what you find out about yourself and what you find out about teams and groups and take it back into your actual life as a human in the world away from Outward Bound. So that's sort of one of the things that really makes a difference, is this focus on the lessons that you learn and how you can transfer that into your daily life. And we do that with adults in a way that's accessible, right? Like, we're not out here trying to hike as many miles as we possibly can in a day. We're not out here trying to paddle as many miles as we possibly can. It's about modulating the challenge and making it appropriate for the group. And every adult that comes on an Outward Bound course, or 99% of them, all have that same fear and that same concern of whether or not they think they can do it. And we want you to feel like you can do it. We want you to do it, right? Like, our spirit's not there to like break you down or any of those things. Like, we want you to feel lifted up when you leave an Outward Bound course.
Yeah. So does everybody come out of an Outward Bound course ready to take on adventure racing?
If they've gone on a course with me, they probably do, because I'm pretty excited about it and I talk about it. No, not necessarily adventure racing, but they are often, in proportion to what they did on course, ready to come on and take on whatever challenge it is in their life that they're facing.
Yeah, something bigger. And so now let's go back to mom comes home and she tells you about it. It becomes this rite of passage. From my perspective, it almost seems like something happened on that trip where she sort of almost felt like this awakening. And she said, like, I want my family, my kids to experience this same awakening. So did you have that same experience when you went on your first Outward Bound trip?
It's tricky because when both my parents did their Outward Bound courses, they were completely novel experiences to them. And many people that come on an Outward Bound course, it is a novel experience. And that's part of the idea, is that it's this really unique pattern interrupt, very different thing. For me, so I went on my Outward Bound course when I was 14 and a half. It was the summer between 8th grade and 9th grade. I went on my first backpacking trip when I was 9 years old. So by the time I got to my Outward Bound course, it was like, it was not quite as novel of an experience. So I can't say that I had that massive awakening, except for the fact that it was confirmation that I was absolutely in the right place doing the right thing.
I love it. Okay. So this is like giving us a glimpse of this adventure spirit that you developed as a kid and as a teenager. And then you see this show at age 25 and you're like, I want to do that. And I have to believe that it's sort of the confidence that you've built over time and doing these things out in the wilderness that kind of made you be able to say, like, I think I can do that. So I'm curious, like, how you got started. You saw the show and that next thing you know, you're an adventure racer. How do you go from watching a show to becoming an adventure racer?
Yeah, I mean, there was a good decade in there where I wasn't adventure racing, at least, maybe more than that, because in reality, it was probably more like I was 20, not 25. But, it was something that had just been like a kernel in the back of my head. But because of that, instilling of adventure, I had been participating in adventure sports and adventure activities, throughout my life, throughout the rest of my like adolescence and into my 20s and 30s. I was climbing and mountain biking and doing all of the different disciplines, just never putting it all back together. And then, I was going through, as we do at different times in our lives, a little bit of a transition in my maybe, I guess, early 30s of just sort of like, I really want to do some things. I want to tackle some things I've always wanted to do. I mean, the careers that you mentioned that I had were also similarly where I looked at something, I was like, I want to do that, right? Like I'm an experiential learner by design, right? So, even becoming a firefighter was the same thing of like, I want to do that. And I did that. Right. So, at one point it finally was like, you know what? I've always wanted to adventure race. I'm going to make this happen. And I found somebody who would adventure race with me, who ultimately was, at the time, like one of my very best friends from childhood who had been on some of those early backpacking trips with me. And she was an athlete and I was like, hey, we should do this. Right. And we, researched and found a local race and entered and had a great time and did one again 6 weeks later. And it sort of was off to the races, so to speak, for me at that point.
Yeah. So, and you actually competed in the world championship at one point. So how do you go from like that from the show, from like watching a show to doing a couple of races to now you're in the world championships?
Yeah, it sounds trite, but it's one step at a time, right? I mean, it's one race at a time, So the first race that I ever did, I did with one other woman and it was a 6-hour race, and then it took years, at least another 3 or 4 years before I was able to get to the length of doing an expedition adventure race, which is really what I wanted to do. That length of, more than 48 hours, more like, 72 hours to 6 or 7 days, sort of the length that it takes most folks to do that like world championship length. And I just kept meeting people and it's such an incredible community. And I was able to, kind of work my way onto some different teams. And, my first world championship, I was actually asked to join a team that was going. And that was just a real honor to be able to do that. And then was able to put together a team in the following year for another world championship race. So, yeah, I mean, it's a long journey. It takes time, but I was really pretty committed to it. And I was very hooked and very excited to be doing it.
Yeah. Well, sure looks like a lot of fun from the movie. I know it's not all fun. There's a lot of pain and suffering in there too, I'm sure. But I look at everything we've talked about, from Outward Bound to being a firefighter to being a police officer to adventure racing. There's an underpinning element of bravery and courage that has to exist for that whole thread, all of it. I just wonder if you could share your sort of thoughts on the idea of courage.
Courage is one of my like personal core values. It's something that I personally want to center in my life in terms of making courageous decisions. And it's funny because not a lot of people could probably name their personal core values. But because of the work that we do at Outward Bound and all those things, like it's something that I can certainly do. And I encourage people to go through that process for themselves, because being able to have those guideposts for how you want to live your life is really important. So courage is one of those things. And I think for me, when I think about this idea of I want to go do that, having the courage to know that I may not be able to, and that there might be a failure involved in that, or I may not be the best, because I am not the best adventure racer. I was not the best firefighter. I'm not any of those things, right? But just that courage to try and to take those risks is something that, that risk-taking element has been something that, came probably as a kid as well. And watching my mom take this giant risk of completely changing her career midstream already with 2 kids on board, which was not something that you did in the 80s and early 90s. There's a lot more of that now, but, she really demonstrated that risk and was obviously successful in that. But I would say it comes from that ability to, be brave around that. Brave's a weird word to me, but I do like the word courage.
Yeah. So I like to go deep on this podcast. I'm curious if just for me and for listeners, how would you define the word courage?
It's a really good question. I think there's a level of confidence in knowing that you'll be okay no matter the outcome of what happens. And, everything that we've talked about, and I think this is a good point to say this, is that like everything I've been able to do in my life, this courage, this risk taking, this doing really adventurous things, is because of the privilege that's been afforded to me to do those things, right? Yeah. I have to go seek out challenge and hardship and all those sorts of things because it's not a part of my everyday life. And that's not lost on me, and I'm really grateful for that. And just want to make sure that that's something that folks understand, that there's a lot of privilege involved in being able to like voluntarily pursue hard things, as opposed to just having them be a part of your everyday. I try to steer away from using the word suffering when we talk about it's adventure sports like this, and there's so much pride for a lot of racers like, oh, I'm gonna go out here and suffer today, and I'm like, you know what we're doing is not suffering, you guys. It's not real suffering, right? So just like drawing the awareness to that piece of it. But yeah, I think that idea, and I guess I say that in the sense that courage to take the risk and the self knowing of I'll be okay, regardless of the outcome, is I think something that really defines courage for me.
I love that perspective. Thank you. And, because you brought it up, you've got these core values. I'm curious, what are a couple other of your personal core values?
Yeah, I've really kind of whittled it down to 2, because I feel like kind of everything can fall into those categories, but it's really courage and leadership. Awesome. And how I show up in a community.
Yeah. So speaking of leadership, there was a point in this adventure racing journey that you've been on where you pivoted and began coaching as well. And I'd love to hear about that. And I'm also curious, like, was it a transition to coach, or were you still competing and coaching at the same time?
Yeah, no, definitely coaching and competing at the same time. Did not, wasn't a kind of a pivot away from racing, but yeah, I switched into, I started a business coaching, mindset coaching, what ended up being mostly adventure racers, and not only doing the mindset coaching pieces, but I was actually building training programs for folks at the same time. So really prescribing workouts and saying, hey, this is what you need to go do. But what was the sort of unique part about my business is that I would maybe go prescribe, hey, this is your 3-hour bike ride today. These are the things I want you to accomplish in this bike ride physically, but here's also the things I want you to accomplish mentally and emotionally while you're on that bike ride. Here's the self-talk that you're going to actually practice utilizing during your training, because obviously what we do in training is what we do in real life, and we want to make sure that we've laid the groundwork for that. At a point, that the training is, that the hay is made, the hay's in the barn, and you're going to go out there, and how you show up physically is one thing. But really, one of the things that I love the most about adventure racing and any endurance sport is the mental aspect of it. So really, my business kind of focused on not only the preparing of the physical body, but also the mental body.
Yeah. Oh, we could talk for a long time about this piece because it's got to be so cool to be like really building people up and coaching people in an area that you're so passionate about.
Yeah, it was great. And it's, it's interesting because I get to kind of do that, or I do still do that when
You
I'm
do?
instructing courses with Outward Bound. I don't instruct as much in the field anymore, but when I do get a chance to go out there, it's very similar. I think what really excites me about coaching adventure athletes is the piece of, why are we doing this, right? Like we do this for the thing, right? And it's great. The actual experience is wonderful. And, I used to say, that the finish line is the start line, meaning that like what you after the race is done is when you really start whatever's next, because now you've taken all of this that you've learned about yourself or about your teammates or about the world, and you're applying it to the rest of your life. And I feel like folks who just go do the race and that's it, like they're doing a disservice to themselves by not taking the time to be intentionally reflective about what they've learned about themselves during that time. And that goes for any hardship that somebody might go through, whether it's a race or whether it's some sort of, a financial challenge or whatever it is. It's like taking that time to intentionally reflect and learn from those experiences is where the real value is, right? It's why I think we do these things.
Yeah. And I think what's so cool, like with adventure racing, it does seem intimidating to a layman that's not been introduced into that world. But I think it's really interesting. Like I've done some study and some reading about the concept of flow, and this is just like that being in the zone, right? And there's this thing called the challenge skills ratio, which you're probably familiar with, but it's a trigger for flow. But it's like if a thing that you set out to do is below your skill set, it's kind of boring. It's like, it doesn't really, but if it's too far beyond your skill set, it becomes overwhelming. And so it's like matching the challenge with the skill. But when you go and you do something hard, you have like your kind of limit raises, right? And so like for somebody like you that started as a kid doing something like Outward Bound, and then I'm sure you've had all kinds of experiences in the police force and as a firefighter, and then adventure racing. I mean, you're constantly like raising that bar, and it's something that happens over time. It's not something you just step into. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. They call it like that Goldilocks zone when, I think
Yeah.
Atomic Habits, he kind of refers to it as that Goldilocks zone where you're supposedly it's like the actual number is like 4% or something like that. Like if you're like 4% doing something that's 4% more difficult than your like actual skill level, it's like that's when you are totally engaged and completely focused because that's the level. Otherwise you tune out or you tune out because it's too hard. So yeah, finding that flow and continually pushing that envelope, right? So at first, a 6-hour race is a lot, right? And then you're like, okay, well, great. Well, what's a 12-hour race feel like? And then now what's a 24-hour race feel like? And all those sorts of things. And so now I'm at the point where my sort of off the couch length where I know I can just kind of go do is like a 24-hour race, right? Which seems like an insane amount of time to most people.
Right.
It is an insane amount of time. I'm not saying that's not. It is an insane amount of time. I've just been able to kind of push to that level. But I think you find a lot of folks who have similar similar personalities or characteristics as I do. It's like you're always looking for that next area of growth. And people will say that it's like, oh, you're looking for your next high or your adrenaline high. But really it is like that next stage of learning and the next stage of growth. So yeah, kind of
That
always looking
that
for
makes total sense. And like, to me, you seem like that really exemplifies like who you are, is that like constant leveling up. And it's really pretty awesome. Your coaching company was called Action First. Wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, it's an is, I'm still doing some coaching, not anywhere near the volume that I was, because when I was racing and kind of coaching full time, the Outward Bound opportunity came to me, which felt very serendipitous in life. So I transitioned
Yeah.
to Outward Bound and coaching much less as a result of that. But Action First came as sort of both a physiological and a philosophical way of looking at things. I mean, how many people can relate to you have had a really busy day at work, you've been, sort of super hyper vigilant about whatever's been going on, you've been very focused, and you get home and you kind of hit that couch and your nervous system is like, you rest and digest, right? Like we were all the way activated at, fight or flight mode, and then we're now kind of, okay, now I'm on the couch and I'm rest and digest. And we try to, regain back to that normalcy of sort of that middle state of not being triggered in either one of those ways. But honestly, in order to get sort of out of rest and digest, you've got to give yourself a little bit of a boost, right? And that normally has to come from your brain as opposed to your body. And so the idea was that take that action first, right? And that gets you moving and off the couch, and then you're able to stay in motion. So really it was that idea of, it's really easy to stay on the couch, and you've got to make yourself get up and go. And there's nothing no one else who's going to do that for you except yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And your coaching company has a great tagline.
Yeah. The voluntary pursuit. Can I say it? I don't know. Come
on.
The voluntary pursuit of shit that's hard. Right. Yeah. Right. And deliberately going out there and choosing discomfort. And, it's basically the same thing at Outward Bound, right? It's like we're choosing to be uncomfortable, and we're choosing to embrace that discomfort because we know what can be gained as a result of doing it.
Yeah. So I really love this. And I think we just kind of talked a lot about it with this 4% Goldilocks zone and the constant up leveling. You have an intensity about you that almost makes you appear immune from fear and doubt and vulnerability. I'm curious if you could talk about how those things show up for you.
Well, I'm not, first of all. I have all the fears and all the doubts and all the vulnerabilities. Yeah, man. I mean, I think it's one of those, it's what people say all the time, right? Like that fear is deciding to do, or fear of the thing, you do it anyway, I have a lot of fear. I have shown up on start lines at races and thought to myself, oh my gosh, I should not be here. There's 1,000 reasons I should not be here. I haven't trained enough. I'm not experienced enough, whatever it is. I'm not enough. Right. I mean, you might look at me and be like, oh, you've done all these cool things and all of that. And like, yes, intellectually, I know that's true. But I still, as a human middle-aged woman, sit there with all of the I'm not enough feelings, right? So I think it doesn't matter who you are or what you do. Like those things are always present. And it's just a matter of like what you do with that when you see it you hear it in your brain.
Yeah. Sarah, when you think about all of this, like from Outward Bound, your career, the adventure racing, and you kind of reflect on like the whole experience, and I know we're not done yet, but up until this
whole life experience,
what are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of the hard decisions that I've made in my life to create significant change. I was a firefighter for just about a decade, and leaving that job and not necessarily knowing what was next, because I didn't know what was going to come afterwards. I just knew that, I needed to do something different. I love that job. I love the people. I love the community. And I knew I didn't want to do it for the, next 20 years. And the way the pension worked, it was kind of like either stay or go sort of situation. But making those big choices, and they've worked out well for me. Like I've obviously been really fortunate. It comes back to a lot of that privilege, right? Of being able to say, I'm going to make what was for me a hard choice to transform my life and change that. And I'm proud of the fact that I had the courage and was willing to take the risk to do that.
Yeah. And what is what is it like for you where the story almost kind of begins with Outward Bound, and now here you are, you find yourself as community programs director for the North Carolina Outward Bound School? Like it kind of feels full circle to me, but like, what is that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it still often will blow my mind that I am where I am doing what I'm doing. Like I said, we lived in the Midwest. I ultimately moved to Virginia before I came here to North Carolina, but, we were in the Midwest. My mom came to Table Rock just by chance because that's when the course dates worked out for her. I moved to Asheville not because of Outward Bound, because of something else. And so the first time I saw Table Rock, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is the Table Rock that my mom told me about, right? Like and then when first time I walked around that base camp, I was like, I can't believe my mom's been here. This is so crazy. So yeah, when I wake up and I talk about Outward Bound and I think about Outward Bound, I'm like, of course I work for Outward Bound. Right? And I never I didn't ever really intend to. Like, there was never this point where I was like, 17 and I'm going to go to college and I'm going to become an Outward Bound instructor. It found me again in life while I was going through another transition. And so it really, yeah, there's a lot of serendipity in it.
Yeah. I mean, Outward Bound, I'm a huge fan, amazing organization. And as I think about it though, like what an amazing fit. Like they are so lucky to have you. You just,
Thank you.
I mean,
I'm lucky to have them for sure. It's mutual.
Yeah. What do you want listeners to know about Outward Bound from this experience? Like how they can connect with it? Is there anything else that you want listeners to take away from this episode with regards to Outward Bound?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that Outward Bound provides a number of different types of opportunities. Some people, and it's for everyone. Some people have a misconception. I think there were some movies in the 90s where somebody went like sent away to Outward Bound for rehab, and it sort of got that, got that connotation for a long time. It's not that. Right. So Outward Bound is available to kind of anyone. There's lots of different ways to experience Outward Bound, whether it's a day program in a city like Charlotte or Atlanta, or if it's a 70-day semester expedition during a gap year, is kind of everything in between. Outward Bound is also a nonprofit, which is something that a lot of folks don't necessarily realize either. And because of the support of our donors, we're able to provide a lot of scholarship funding to our students as well, especially at the North Carolina Outward Bound School. So, we try to make these experiences as accessible as possible to people, both in like what the actual activities are and, by providing financial support to do that. So I would say if you're just a little bit curious about Outward Bound, take a look at our website, take a look at someone maybe who's been there, and ask more questions, and know that it's all, we want it to be achievable for people. So while I know it's intimidating, it is something that I have watched folks from all different walks of life be able to find success and have really transformative experiences. And we're often, at the end of an Outward Bound course, kind of instructional staff will look at each other and be like, it worked again. It's like, it's almost like we're surprised every time, when we hear what our students are saying as they're leaving. It's like, yeah, I mean, it just works. So I would say take a look and learn more and get curious.
Are there any like transformational memories, like experiences that you've like witnessed, other people that have taken the course, and like, a transformation that you've witnessed from them and being on the course?
Yeah, I would say that I have seen with adults specifically, I've done a lot of work with adults in my career. You can get a whole lot of change out of an adult in a really short amount of time because it's such a big interrupt for them in their life. So we work with a lot of groups that come up to us for like 72 hours at a time. And on that third day, the tears are there, the reconnection to self, right? Like that belief of, I didn't think I could climb that mountain. And they do climb that mountain. And I think a lot of times it's just that reinstilling a lot of confidence in adults, and not only as like to what they can do as an individual, but also how they can connect to other adults and what that feeling and connection can look like. So yes, I've seen it sort of all.
Well, I can tell you, like, I remember as a kid going to summer camp and talking to other kids that had been on Outward Bound, and I always had this just natural curiosity about it and sort of this desire. I have not done a course yet, but I say yet because I will. My daughter has, so I can definitely speak not from direct experience, but through her. And I know it was absolutely a game changer for her. And yeah, I still need to get out there and do an actual Outward Bound course. I've done some, a good bit of adventuring myself, but I would like to add that one to the list as well, because it's such an amazing organization. So Sarah, we know that Hollywood appreciates adventure racing and they're willing to make movies about it. And your life has been epic. And I know that at some point Hollywood's going to pick up on your story too. And when they do, they're going to want to make a movie about you. And it's going to be more than just adventure racing. That's just going to be a segment. But I'm curious, when they make the movie about you, who's going to be the actress that's going to play you in that movie?
It's funny to try to answer this question without seeming so self-focused, but I guess it's a self-focused question. I laugh because I've actually so I was, when I left the fire service, I went overseas and I worked in Iraq for a little while as a contract firefighter for the U.S. military. And I was in, this is not a joke, this is a very true story, but I was in the Baghdad airport as a civilian, and I was in the bathroom, and the bathroom attendant was this older Iraqi woman, and she walked over to me in the bathroom, and she looked at me and she goes, Demi Moore? And I was like, it was the most flattering thing I'd ever heard in my entire life. Because I was like, wow. I was like, no, but I like, wow, you mistook me for being Demi Moore. I mean, I was wearing like, BDU pants and like probably had a very G.I. Jane vibe going on. So I appreciated that she said that. But yeah, I guess, maybe it depends on what age we're talking about here, but probably, I would take Demi Moore. I've also been told that I look like Carrie-Anne Moss from The Matrix.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So, one of those two. Not
Yeah. All right. I like it. It's going to be a good cast. They're going to have to compete for the role because those are both really good options. What's the movie going to be called?
Oh man, I have no idea. Something with the word courage in it, I guess. Courage Under Fire is already taken. So I don't know, something with courage in it.
Courageous. I mean, we could just keep it simple right there. I love it. Sarah, what's the best place for people to find out more about you or Outward Bound or even get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I would tell folks to check out Outward Bound for sure. And I would tell you to check out the North Carolina Outward Bound School specifically. We're here in the Southeast. It's also where you'll find me. So do that at our website, which is www.ncobs.org. So that's www.ncobs.org, or just Google North Carolina Outward Bound School. And then if you're looking for more about me and my coaching business, you can still find that at actionfirst, all one word, .net.
Awesome. Actionfirst.net. Sarah, thank you so much. This has been so much fun. This has been just such a great conversation. And for those listening, I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope Sarah's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or just need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening. Sarah, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.